In this video, we're going to be creating this weather app using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now here on the screen, you can see that we have an input and then this button. Now in this input box, you can type in name of any place or city. And let's say I type in Meghalaya and click on this button. Now it generates this weather card when we have the image, the temperature, and then this humidity and also the wind speed. Now we have also added proper error handlings for this project. Now let's say you type in a place which doesn't really exist. Now let's say I type in doesn't exist itself and then click on this get weather. Now this would say no data found. Now by building this project, you're going to be learning how to do proper error handlings while fetching a data from an API, how to add a loader to your project while the data is getting fetched, and also you're going to be learning how to add event listeners to a button. So just like usual, we're going to have the source code of this project down in the description, so you guys can definitely download the project from the Google Drive link and can play around. And now, so before we get started with this project, I humbly request to the new viewers or people who view our videos but do not actually subscribe, so please subscribe our channels because it is a huge motivation for us as well, so that we keep bringing you more quality content. And make sure you turn the notification bell on so that you never miss any of our updates. Thank you. Here I am in my VS Code, so I have opened my VS Code on the left and my browser on the right side. Now to create this project, we're going to need three files: index.html, style.css, and then this script file for the JavaScript, which is empty. Now in my index.html file, I have already linked my style.css and also have imported font awesome, since we're going to be needing two icons for the wind speed and also for the droplet icon that you see for the humidity. Now I have also linked my custom style.css file as well. Now in the body, I'm going to create a container div, and then within which I'm going to type in an h1 and put out the name of the app, which is weather app. And then I'm going to create a div with a class of weather info, wherein I'm going to add the input box, which gonna be for the location, and then the button which would say get weather. Now we would create a loader which would be responsible for the loading that you see, and we can also give it a class of loader along with the ID of loader. And then we're going to be creating the weather card that would have all the details, so we're going to write weather card. So we would also have weather card as the ID and also for the class. And then inside of this, I'm going to be creating a div within which I'm going to have two spans, one for the temperature and then one for the condition. So I'm going to be giving these two spans two IDs, one for condition and then one for the temperature. And then right after that, so we would have another div. Now this div would have two spans, one with the wind speed ID and then the other would be for the humidity ID. Now the reason for having these empty spans is because we're gonna fill in the data from the API and then we're gonna insert those using JavaScript in these spans. Now after that, we would need a div for the error, so we're gonna call it just error. So we're gonna give this div an ID of error and we're gonna leave it empty. So if there is any error, we're gonna fill in this div with that specific error. And then at the end, we would have the script and we can write script.js. Now to create this weather app, I have used the free API provided by OpenWeather. Now you can go to their website and then you can choose which API you want from this API section. And then what I did was, I think I chose the current weather API. And then you need to click on this subscribe button and then to generate the API key. So since I have already generated the API key, so what you need to do is you need to click on this free section, this create account, and then you need to create a new account and then generate the API key. Now since I already have created the account and since I already have the API key, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just paste in here for my finished project. So I'm going to be pasting in API key and then also the URL base, which would contain the URL, and then I have just concatenated this API key along with this URL, which is going to be creating this entire URL base. Now once we're ready with that, we can start coding and then start building our weather app. Now the first thing that we need to do is we need to add a loader. Now since we already have this loader defined, I'm going to just type in loading here just so we can see that we have the loader visible. And then initially this loader would be hidden, so I'm going to just type in display none so that it is not visible. And then we're going to create a function which would make this loader visible, so we can type in show loader, and then I'm going to be grabbing onto the loader using query selector, and then would add the display property as block. And then let's call this function. I'm going to be changing this computed style to style, and now you can see that our loading is visible. Now similarly, we're going to be creating one class to hide this loader, and this time we're going to be grabbing onto this loader again by query selector, and this time we would set the display to none. And with that, we have our two show loader and then hide loader function created. Now you can see that I can type in hide loader. Now this would hide the loader that was showing on the screen. Now we're going to create a function which would be responsible for showing the weather card. Now initially the weather card would be hidden, so we're going to name it show weather card, and then would grab onto the weather card by using the query selector, and would add the style display as block. Now initially, since this is going to be hidden, so I also need to add the display none here in the CSS. Now keep in mind that this is just like the dummy CSS that we are filling in just so we can finish up our JavaScript. Now after we are done with the project, the JavaScript part, we can add the specific CSS styling to make it look good. Now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create our function to get the weather. So we're going to write get weather. Here I'm going to be creating a variable location which would have the value that is stored in this input box, and then I would also create a URL which would be based on this value. So I'm gonna add the base URL and then add ampersand with Q for query, and then would pass in this value that is stored in the location. And then I'm gonna write show loader while this URL is getting fetched. Now we're gonna write fetch URL and then write a dot then, and then whatever response that we get, we want to return a response.json. And then in the next then, we're gonna be grabbing onto this data that we just got from the previous then, and we want to console the data. Now since this get weather is a function, we need to call this function. So first let's add the event listener to the button. So we're going to grab onto this button by query selector. Since we know that this button has an ID of submit, we're going to grab onto that and then add in add event listener, and then add the click event, and then pass in this get weather function. Now let's open the console, and then let's type in a name of a place. Let's write India. Now you can see that we have this loading, and then also we have the data in our console as well. Now if we just open this object, you would see that we have all these different values here, or all these different data. Now inside of this weather, you would see that we have this main description and also the icon. And inside of this main, you would have the temperature, feels like, temp minimum, temp max, and also the pressure. So we're going to be adding these in our weather app. So we would need to create different variables to store in different values. All right, so first I'm going to be creating a temperature variable which would store the temperature that we just saw inside of our main. So we're going to target the data, main, and then temp. Just like that, we're going to be having different variables, and we're going to be storing different values in those variables. Now we have all that we need in different variables. Now all that is left to do is we need to insert these inside of these elements. So what I'm going to be doing is, first I'm going to be grabbing onto the temperature div. So I'm just going to type document.querySelector, and then we'll select the temperature using the temperature ID, and then would write inner HTML, and then inside of this I'm going to be creating template literals, and then first I'm going to be writing this temperature, so the variable that holds temperature, followed by a superscript element which is sup, and here I'm going to be adding that degree sign, and then followed by a C for Celsius. And then I'm going to be creating one div which would hold the feels like temperature. So I'm going to be writing feels like, followed by the feels like value, and then again I'm going to be I'm just going to be copying this superscript with this degree and then the C for Celsius, and then we'll paste it here. And then lastly we would have another div for the place and then the country. So for that we have two variables, one as place and then one as country. So I'm just going to be writing that, and with that our data for this temperature is set. Now to check, let's type in something. Let's type Goa and let's hit search. So we have this loader showing here, and since I think we have added the display none, let's remove it so that we can see the value. So here you can see that the temperature in Goa and also feels like and also the place and country. So this temperature is all set. Now we need to set the image. So for the image I think we have the condition span, so I'm just going to be grabbing that using query selector again, and then inside of this condition I'm going to be setting inner HTML, and then would add template literals within which I'm going to be creating this image tag wherein I'm going to be writing source. And now for the source we would need the URL. So what I'm going to be doing is, let's go to the open weather page and let's grab onto the URL. So first let's type here open weather image, and yeah, here. So let's copy this section. Let's paste it here. Now instead of this part we would have the icon that is provided in the weather array in the object that you see. So I'm just going to write this variable weather icon, and then since I want the icon to be a bit bigger, so you can write @2x.png. Now with that we would have the source of the image, and then I would add the alternate attribute to the image. Now this alternate attribute also we have stored in another variable, so we can just type that in. So we also have the condition here, and then I'm going to be setting the humidity and also the wind speed in the respective spans. Now we have all the data set in respective spans. Now we're going to call this hide loader, since we have all our data fetched and we want now to hide the loader and we want to show the weather card. Now here let's type in place Let's type Sikkim, and then oops, I think this alt tag, this alt attribute, I think yes, so I have added the alt attribute in a new line instead of in the same element as in the image. So I just need to cut this out here, and then would need to paste it in here. Okay, so now if you type in Sikkim, we should be able to see the data. So we have the cloud, the temperature, feels like, place, and also the wind speed, and also the humidity as well. Now there are a few stuff that we also need to do. Now in case, let's say we type in a data, or let's say we type in a stuff that is not found, so we would need to handle that error as well. So now let's say we type in something that this API cannot fetch, or there is no place like that, so it shows this loading, but then we do not have any message saying that we do not found any data. So to do that, we need to first, so you can check this again, it again shows this loading screen. Now here we need to add a catch block so that we can catch if there is any error. So to do that, we're going to just type in .catch, and then here if there is any error, what we would do is we would just first let's display the error. So let's just type error, and then we're gonna just see what error is it's showing on the screen. Okay, let's refresh and let's type in a place. All right, now here you would see that this is being shown, or this is the error that is sent whenever this place is not found in the API. All right, now as you can see here, it has this message saying city not found. Now we're gonna have our own message which would say do not data not found. So what we could do is we have this div with the ID of error, so we can grab onto that div and we can add the inner HTML of that div, and then we can say no data found. Now we can call the function hide loader so that this loader gets hidden and we get this message saying no data found. Now we can type in a place which does not exist and then click on this button. Now this would say no data found. Now there is still an issue with this, and that is, let's say I type in Guwahati and then I search. Now you would see that even though I have this data, it still shows this no data found. So what we have to do is whenever this data is, the weather card data is being shown, I want the data for the error, so whatever is inside of the error needs to be blank when we get data from the weather card. All right, and then as you can see, I can remove and I can type in Guwahati again. Now this time no data found is not shown. Now let's add some CSS and let's style it a bit. Now let's clean up our CSS and let's get started. Now initially I've set the font family as Poppins and also did remove the default margin and padding as well. Now we're going to be adding display flex and flex down in the column, and also we're going to be setting a min height and also padding in the body. Then we're going to target the container and we're going to give it a margin, and then we're going to align the text. Now we're going to target the weather card and we're going to add display flex, and then would add flex action to column, and then would add justify content and align items to center it. And then we're going to target the input box. We're going to give it a bit of padding, width, and then border radius, and then a border followed by a font size of 12 pixels. Now we would also give it margin right and also margin top. Now we're going to need to style our button, so we're going to target the button and we're going to give it the same border. We're going to give it padding of 8 pixel top and bottom and 10 pixel left and right, followed by font size, and so let's try to change that. now let's keep it 5 pixel. Now we can target the font size of the button, and we're going to set the font size and also border radius, and then we're going to set the background and the color. Now we're going to target the temperature, and we're going to set the font size to this. Now since everything is so big, we only want the temperature to be big, so the div inside of a temperature, which we generated via JavaScript, we're going to set the font size to 12 pixels. Now we're going to target the weather card that holds everything, and we're going to give it a display none since initially this weather card needs to be hidden, followed by margin, border radius, padding, and then width of 70%, and then also position of relative, and then box shadow and a border. Now since the CSS is pretty simple, we do not need an in-depth explanation of actually what is going on. Now we're going to target the condition div or the span with the ID of condition, and we're going to give it proper styling. Now since this holds the image, now we're going to target the image, and we're going to give it width and height of 100%, and then object fit to cover, and we're going to zoom it a bit using the scale transform property, and we're going to set the overflow to hidden. Now every div that is inside of this weather card, we're going to target that. Now direct divs that are inside of weather card, only those would be affected. Now we're going to set the display as flex, and then would also justify content and align items to center. Now this is almost looking like our finished project. Now we need to target the humidity and then this wind speed. So the I tag inside of both, we're going to target that, and we're going to increase the font size and also would set this color. Now we're going to target the humidity and then this wind speed, and we're going to add display flex and would give it a justify content center and align items to center, and also would set a margin inline and also give it a bit gapping. Now the next thing that we need to do is we need to create our loader. So for the loader, we're going to set the display as none. Since initially it's going to be display none, we're going to give it a margin and also a border of this. And now we also would need to have a border top, so we're going to give it 4 pixels solid and of this bluish color. Now this border radius would be 50%. Since we gonna have this as circle, so we're gonna give it width and height, and also this animation of spin of 2 seconds linear, which is gonna run for infinity. Now we're gonna create the keyframes for this spin. So for 0%, we want the transform rotate at 0 degrees, but for 100%, it's gonna be 360 degrees. Now we also need to create the error, so we're going to target the error div, and we're going to set the color to red, font weight to 500, and also margin top of 20 pixels. Now let's say we search for a place, let's say we search for Goa, and we get this loading. Let's remove the loading inner text. Now let's search again, and we get the data. Now there is one last thing that is left to be done, and that is whenever our weather ad throws in an error, we want to hide our weather card. So we're going to do this by grabbing onto this weather card using the class of .weather card, just like this, and we're going to give it style display as none. So let's say we search for Guwahati. Now this time it shows the data, but then let's say we search something like this and it shows no data found, and then also it hides the weather card.